Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen in Paris. In this edition, we consider the meeting of arguably the two most powerful political leaders in the world. Donald Trump travels to Beijing, where he'll be hosted by Xi Jinping. On the agenda, a series of issues that could cement the superiority of one over the other, even lead to a new world order, because beneath the diplomatic and the friendly language that we often see and hear, there are messages that will be hard to digest for one of these men. Behind the handshake, and there always is a handshake, isn't there? There's likely to be an arm wrestle over who has dibs where, who has the deciding word wherever it is in the world. Our panel gathered here is going to dissect what's at stake, and I know they will answer all your questions of what is one of the most testing of times, because there is so much on the agenda. Let's introduce to you our panel in no order of preference, because they are all excellent guests. First, Philippe Lecour is Senior Fellow at the Centre for China Analysis at the Asia Society Policy Institute and Professor at ESSEC Business School. Philippe, thank you for being with us, sir. Great to see you. On the other side of the studio, but not necessarily against, although maybe we'll see, Claudia Astarita, who's researcher at the Institut d'Asie Orientale in Lyon and lecturer at Sciences Po in Paris. Thank you for being with us. We have two guests joining us from afar, and they are very welcome too. First, in New York City, Zhongguan Zoe Liu, who's Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and Adjunct Professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Thank you for being with us. Joining us from Evanston, Illinois, is Nancy Qiang, who's Professor of Economics at Northwestern University at the Kellogg School of Management and co-director of the Global Poverty Research Lab at Northwestern and founder of the Independent China Lab. Thank you all for being with us. Now, first, let's check out the credentials, boxing-wise, if you like, of the two leaders involved in this and give you an insight into what we're talking about. Let's bring up the record, the credentials of both men. We see here, of course, Xi Jinping, and we see Donald Trump. Xi Jinping in the red corner, perhaps, Donald Trump here in the blue corner. And let's get a breakdown of just exactly who they are, what they're about. So if we're talking in boxing terms, they would both be classed, of course, as heavyweights. There we get it. In terms of their reach, that's the punching range. Well, it's global because they can go anywhere in the world and do what they need to do. As for their power, well, let's talk about GDP, spending power, of course, for the countries. 20 trillion for China, 30 trillion for the US. So that's all, of course, up for debate. As for their records as politicians, Xi Jinping, overall leader of China since 2012, someone who is basically unquestioned. As for Donald Trump, well, he's had one bout that he's lost, that 2020 election is Joe Biden, knocked out by them. But of course, he disputes that. Weak spots, maybe we can explore that a little bit more in this debate. For Xi Jinping, clearly, Taiwan is a big question mark. And as for Trump, well, Iran, there we have it. So there we have a breakdown as to who these two men are. If you were putting money on this, I'm turning to the panel now, who would you back to be the winner if this were a boxing match, proverbially speaking? Let's start with our guest in New York. That is Zhongguan Zoe Liu. Who would your money be on, Zoe?
Yeah, Mark, this is such a wonderful way to lay down the card. And if I must choose, I would have to say there are reasons to believe that President Xi Jinping has the better card, and but it's doubtful that he could play the card the way that we would want him to play. Part of the reason is because he faces his own constraints at home and internationally, especially with regard to China's international economic status.
So you're actually sitting on the fence, I think, Zoe, on that one, not actually choosing one or the other. Perhaps Xi Jinping leaning towards a boxing fight can go anywhere, as we know, with one blow, but this is obviously negotiations, it's diplomacy, it's a different agenda. Let's come to the studio and put that same question to Philippe Lecour in terms of who you would think, if you had to put a nominal €5 on one of these two guys to come out best, who do you think it would be?
So I think Xi Jinping, because he's a better planner. The Chinese, they plan 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in advance, and they know where they're going. Now, the problem with Donald Trump, his counterpart, is that they don't really know what to expect from him. That would be his advantage, his asset, that he basically comes up with new things, new ideas, making comments, not necessarily good for China, but sometimes good. In the case of Taiwan, we don't know yet.
Indeed, it is fascinating to think of the two different approaches here that both men are bringing to the table, or the ring, if we'll continue the boxing imagery. Maybe I should park that here now because we've done this setup and I think the guests have had enough already. Let's go to Illinois, where Nancy Qian is waiting for us, Professor of Economics at Northwestern, also co-director of Global Poverty Research and founder of the Independent China Lab. Nancy, can you hear us? I hope you're okay. What's your sense of who will get the best out of this face-off between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump?
So first, let me echo Zoe and say what a great way of framing this. If you asked me a year ago, I would say Trump for sure. He just has a lot to play with. He had a lot of levers. America is the biggest military and the biggest economy. But now I would say Xi. And not €5, I would bet €10, €100. Inflation's happening. And the reason is because I think, what Xi really wants for China is for China to be equal partner with the US on the geopolitical stage, amongst other things. And Trump has just handed that to him on a silver platter by isolating America from its allies, by by displaying both America's strength and all of its institutional weaknesses, putting in tariffs, having them taken away. So today, I would say Xi.
Nancy there, getting off the fence completely and upping the stake. We saw there to a sizable €100. So there we go. Nancy likes a bet, and that's a good sign, I think, from any analyst. I think, anyway, there we go. Thank you for those initial opening remarks, all four of you. Let's get into how this is going to work out, because clearly when two such powerful leaders get together, there are many questions to be raised. So let's give you a little insight, a little report to kind of set up the rest of our programme.
US Air Force planes land at Beijing airport ahead of US President Donald Trump's arrival on Wednesday.
At the invitation of President Xi Jinping, President Trump will pay a state visit to China, the first visit by a US president in 9 years. President Xi will hold in-depth discussions with President Trump on major issues concerning China-US relations, as well as world peace and development.
Washington and Beijing have been at loggerheads over issues ranging from trade tariffs to the Middle East war. Trump is expected to urge President Xi Jinping to pressure Iran into making concessions. Beijing is the biggest buyer of Tehran's oil, giving it leverage. China, meanwhile, wants to talk about Taiwan, which it claims as part of its territory. The US is an important ally to Taiwan, but Trump has demonstrated greater ambivalence towards it since his return to the White House.
There is one package that President Trump has announced of arms sales to support the defense of Taiwan, but there's a second package that has been languishing. And it is very much in President Xi's interest to instill upon President Trump the importance of keeping that second arms sales package languishing.
The White House has promised that Trump will, quote, deliver more good deals for Americans. His transactional approach has raised concerns that US support for Taiwan could become a bargaining chip.
I have a great relationship with President Xi. We're doing a lot of business, but it's smart business. We used to be taken advantage of for years with our previous presidents, and now we're doing great with China. We make a lot of money with China.
One card Taiwan holds is its semiconductor sector, which the US relies on to maintain an edge in its advanced technology race against China. In an attempt to reassure Taiwan ahead of the visit, the US Secretary of State said that the White House's policy towards it remained unchanged and that it didn't want to see any forced change in the situation.
That gives us a sense of what's at stake. Let's bring in Claudia Astarita, who is researcher at the Institut d'Asie Orientale and lecturer at Sciences Po in Paris. I didn't get you to give your assessment of who would win the boxing match. You can do that as well if you'd like. But I'm wondering whether there is one particular issue that you feel is going to be really the hot button topic here when these two men get together. What is the one word that one might say that might make the other go, I can't put up with that, and cause a problem? What do you think?
I don't think there will be such a moment in this visit. That's why, in my opinion, we won't really be able at the end of the week to identify a winner of this meeting, of this summit. What I think is that both of them have very different perspective on what they want and what they would like to achieve. And they will have to communicate in a way to understand the real intentions of the other. Also because we're not really talking about just two countries, but two presidents that are directly influencing the policy orientation of the government. So talking to each other will be the key to understand how far they want to go on what. So I guess that's the key point of the summit.
So as going back to the boxing thing, and I'll drop it after this, you're not looking at a knockout, you're looking at maybe a points victory or maybe even a draw by the end of these discussions over 2 days.
Exactly. At that stage, yes, I think that's the only result that we can get.
In our report, when Donald Trump's talking about doing great business with China, having a great relationship, do you believe that? Do you believe when he says that?
I guess the economic relationship would be at the center of negotiations, also because probably that's the only area where they can achieve something, not a compromise, but something that is valuable on both sides. So Trump willing to have more investment, China to have the United States becoming slightly more predictable than they have been so far. So I guess there will be lots of conversation. And it's not a coincidence that, in fact, it's Scott Bessent that is kind of in charge of the visit rather than Marco Rubio or anybody else from the Trump administration. So the economic dimension is really fundamental in this.
So Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, is planning this rather than the Secretary of State Rubio.
Exactly.
Or any number of advisors that Trump would sort of pull out of his coat and say, this guy's in charge, like a Witkoff or Kushner, someone like that. It's actually someone who's going to be with a key role into what financially might be something to talk about.
Absolutely, and that was in Korea until today or until tomorrow to discuss with a vice minister of China what to do in terms of economic cooperation, where to look. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to New York to Zhongguan Zoe Liu, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, among other things. Zoe, great to have you on board as always. In terms of what Xi Jinping is looking for here, we've got this idea about tariffs. And of course, Donald Trump, once upon a time, imposing tariffs at like 145%. China, a country that relies for 1/5 of its exports, so 1/5 of its GDP, is based on exports. So clearly there is something here that Xi Jinping will want from Trump in terms of some kind of stability on pricing.
He is not a soft preference for either President Xi Jinping or for that matter, the Communist Party of China. But I'd say stability now is not just a U.S.-China bilateral relationship. It also matters in terms of the war in Iran, in terms of to what extent potential escalation of the war in the Middle East may trigger a global economic recession, and that is going to backfire to China's export-dependent economy. So overall, I'd say on the economic front, actually, China is very well prepared. On the one hand, China has demonstrated that it not only knows how to fight a trade war, but at least fight and by some measures win, at least temporarily, as demonstrated through the last year. And then on the other hand, domestically, China has been preparing for an indefinite long-term struggle with the United States. Hence, in that context, this idea of self-sufficiency has been going on for a long period of time. But what is really mattering now is stability domestically in terms of political stability and internationally, so that the global market can continue to absorb China's manufactured good. So from that point of view, I'd say there is nothing on the economic front or bilaterally in terms of trade that China won't be able to make a concession. If it means that China needs to just buy more 3Bs, Boeing beef and soybeans, they are willing to make that commitment. But what China really wants is more of a strategic framework that allows the relationship to move towards a more stable relationship. Stable doesn't mean getting better, though. Back to you, Mark.
What would you say that strategic relationship, where would you see that going, Zoe? Just elaborate on that for us.
I'd say at least so far, China has settled into a long-term strategic competition with the United States. So what they are really looking for is a framework that allows the two economies to compete even fiercely, economically, technologically, and so on and so forth, as long as there are some guardrails to prevent all these other competition, prevent those competition to spill over to militarize the conflict, either by accident or by miscalculation.
Zoe, thank you very much indeed. Please stay with us. I'm coming back to the studio to speak to Philippe Lecourt, Senior Fellow at the Centre for China Analysis at the Asia Society Policy Institute. Philippe, as Zoe's speaking there, we're getting great ideas about what Xi Jinping might be looking for. We can imagine what Trump is trying to put on the table to discuss. What we're hearing as well is that whilst there's this idea of stability, there's also the idea of what happens with the war in Iran. It's really impossible to separate these issues, isn't it? It really is. I mean, clearly, is Iran the biggest issue, do you think, that the two men will be speaking about?
No, I think the economy, as we just discussed, will be critical. You know, the fact that the U.S. has been banning some exports of technologies to China, and the fact that China reacted by imposing sanctions on rare minerals and rare earth to the Western side, to the Americans in particular, that was not taken very well. This will be central, because this is something that Trump likes and wants to discuss, and the Chinese want to discuss as well. I also want to add the fact both Trump and Xi Jinping are looking at their domestic publics and the domestic consumption, so to speak. And Trump is heading towards a very difficult midterm election in November. And Xi Jinping is looking at the next party congress in the fall of 2027, which for China is not a long time to wait. It's now, and as you know, there've been a lot of reshuffles, if not purges, within the PLA and within the CCP. So it's very important that this meeting succeeds symbolically, so that the next meeting, and there's going to be more than one meeting this year, is quite extraordinary that there might be up to 4 meetings between these two men this year. There's going to be possibly a return visit by Xi Jinping to the US. There's going to be the APEC meeting taking place in China, and there's going to be the G20 meeting in the US. So possibly, you know, both presidents will be traveling in. So they need to create an atmosphere that shows that these two sort of great leaders, so to speak, are talking to each other. But of course, there'll be a lot of irritants, and Taiwan is going to be one of them. Iran is going to be one of them. As you know, Iran buys, sort of sells 80% of its oil to China. That's 13% of China's oil altogether. But China generally doesn't like this unstable situation in the Strait of Hormuz, this sort of instability, and the fact that, you know, the trade situation globally is not doing well because of this crisis that is adding up to other crises, the war in Ukraine, to, you know, Gaza, and some instability in other parts of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa. So China wants stability.
Do you think Xi Jinping can have an effect on those issues like Ukraine, like Iran? Do you think he can actually sort of have a word and say, look, this stops now, Mr. Trump, let's put the blocks on this, let's stop what's happening in Iran? Do you think he has that kind of influence?
He has, I mean, China has a good relationship with Iran because Iran needs China as a customer of its oil and gas, and that is something that is giving China a lot of leeway. And China is able. Remember that China orchestrated a meeting between the leaders of Iran and Saudi Arabia a few years ago. That was not much more than a handshake, but it gives China, the Chinese leadership, a kind of advantage as opposed to other leaders, and also economically. Think about the Belt and Road Initiative. Think about infrastructures that China has been building over the past years. China needs things to go smoothly and to run smoothly, and Trump has basically, being, creating trouble and cannot get out of this war situation. And China somewhat likes it, but on some other ways doesn't like it because it's not helping in terms of business.
Philip, thank you very much indeed. I'll give you a rest. Let's go to Evanston, Illinois. Nancy Kian is there for us, Professor of Economics at Northwestern University, among other things. Nancy, I hope you can hear us. I hope you've been able to follow what we've been saying here. Talk about the importance of trying to get some kind of result in Iran. Donald Trump perhaps will say to Xi Jinping, will you stop supplying arms to the Iranians? What do you think Xi Jinping might say?
Well, I mean, I think it's really hard to predict what he's going to say. But one thing he could say is, sure, what are you going to give us? Will you lower tariffs? Will you back off Taiwan? I mean, there's a laundry list of things that China is also going to ask for. And then it's up to Trump to decide, is he going to say yes or no to any one of those things?
In terms of Taiwan, I mean, clearly the issue of semiconductors is one of the major cards that could be played there, isn't it, in terms of what Trump might be looking for. What Xi Jinping wants, of course, is to have Taiwan as part of his country. Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, saying that he would defend Taiwan's freedom. Perhaps the US policy changing on that issue?
The U.S. has maintained strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan for decades. And while Biden and other Democratic leaders like Nancy Pelosi skirted very close to the line, they never crossed the line to actually say that the U.S. would fully defend Taiwan. And, I want to mention something pretty interesting. So we just did a survey of Taiwanese political sentiment. And most Taiwanese people are unsure about whether the U.S. will support them. So what I want to say here is we shouldn't just take Taiwan itself out of the equation, right? So how China deals with Taiwan, how the U.S. deals with Taiwan also depends on the policies that the Taiwanese propose, which depends on who they think will back them and how much. And right now, the Taiwanese are also playing it very carefully because they're very unsure about American support under Trump.
So in terms of what Taiwan is asking for, it wants independence. It wants to have the right to have its self-determination, to run its own affairs, to be free of Beijing. But clearly there is this big monster, as they see it, on their doorstep, threatening to take over at any point in time. They will have taken heart from Joe Biden's words back in the day when Biden said that the US would be there to help Taiwan if the need came about. But now things are starting to change. Is the issue of semiconductors going to be the card that they can play to try to, in some way, shape or form, maintain their independence, maintain their separate status from China, basically in terms of how it does that deal with the United States?
The Taiwanese are playing it very carefully. So Taiwanese companies, the biggest ones like Foxconn and TSMC, are operating in all three countries right now, the mainland China, Taiwan, and the US. And it's very difficult for them, coming from a small island nation with very geopolitical power of their own. I mean, they know what they want, but they can't really exercise it on their own without the mainland or the US coming to some agreement. And in terms of this meeting in Beijing, I just want to point out that Trump has taken a lot of leaders from tech and AI to China and finance. And I think that sends a signal, right? That Trump is willing to do deals. That's good for business. That's good for economics. This is also consistent in letting Scott Bessent be in charge of organizing the meetings. So I think there is some space for discussion. Which way will it go? Hard to tell right now.
Nancy, thank you very much indeed for giving some light to these subjects, which are quite tricky, I think, when you're watching from outside to get a real sense on what is going on in these conversations. Because when Trump and Xi sit down, which is going to happen, we understand, Thursday, there's going to be obviously things that are said, and even the slightest remark could take on even bigger importance going forward. Claudia, can I bring you in? Because I know you've got lots to say and lots to add. You can go anywhere you want, but I'd like to start you off by picking up what Nancy was saying about tech leaders going there. I understand it's Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Tesla, Apple, those kind of people.
I think that's very significant, once again, of the importance of the economy in this summit. And also, I think there is an attempt from Donald Trump to try, as I said before, to push China to invest to the United States and to basically delocalize, offer to the US a direct access to technologies that China is developing quite well at the moment. So I don't know if the medium-term, long-term plan of Donald Trump is like, we get the investment, we try to close the gap, the technological gap on certain industries, and we continue to buy time to better fight against our only enemy that remains China, or whether he has another plan. But I really think that he's going in this direction. That's why I insist that, in my opinion, he will try to buy time, where Taiwan too is absolutely the same scenario. And, China will never step backward for Taiwan. So either they find another very creative arrangement to keep the status quo as it is, but I don't think this would fit. The current status quo was never meant to fit China in the long term. We thought it could, but I guess contemporary China, and Xi Jinping in particular, are proving that is not the case. So are they going to negotiate slowly on something else that can save the Communist Party's face and still maintain an acceptable equilibrium for Taiwan, or this will be impossible for the current leadership? That's also something that we don't know.
If it's a question of buying time, surely that plays in favor of Xi Jinping, doesn't it? He's been in charge since 2012. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. 2012, as I understand it, continuously, which is the way of China. Donald Trump, of course, would love that kind of status, I think, to be in that kind of role where he'd be the overall president, king, call it whatever you want of the country. He would love to have that situation. But of course, the USA is a democracy. And in November, as Philip was saying earlier, there's midterm elections. The US people unhappy with what Donald Trump has done regarding Iran, unhappy with promises not being kept, may well give him a bit of a correction, shall we say, to put it in those terms, come November, which may harm his ability going forward to influence policy the way he wants to. So if we're going to buy time, surely that will be in Xi Jinping's favor. And you wonder what that means for Taiwan, for instance.
Well, from my perspective, the more I completely agree with Philippe that what China wants is stability. That's what they need to advance in their 10, 20, 30-year plans. If they can do that with Trump, that is very unpredictable, this will allow China to strengthen their own position. And then I don't think they really care on who will be the next US president. What they care is that the current situation will allow China to get stronger and to advance their own interests in the medium term. What does it mean for Taiwan? Once again, if Taiwan will have, let's say, less significant support from foreign countries, well, it would be a win for China too, that in the meanwhile will continue to try to influence the population, the political dynamics inside Taiwan. Still, we don't know whether a new equilibrium will be enough or something more clear in terms of Taiwanese political status would be needed by the party.
Yeah. Indeed. It's interesting because this idea that perhaps there could be a new world order about to form, countries pivoting towards China rather than towards the United States is interesting. I traveled in Africa a couple of years back, Botswana, talking to people there. They said, well, you know, the US has been involved for many, many years and we're no better off. So why not why not sort of give China a go? And basically they were saying that, so let's encourage Chinese investment into their country. And it is happening. It's happening across Africa. Donald Trump gets to power, he cuts US soft power, US aid into places across Africa, which has had a massive negative effect on healthcare across the continent. But now, of course, we're hearing that they want to sort of start reinvesting in Africa. This idea that you said earlier on about Trump being unpredictable, mercurial, perhaps not really having a real strategic thought, and the people around him not really helping in that way.
You know, it's almost too late for the US to get back to Africa. I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but the Chinese have been there a long time. There's a book written a few years back, China's Second Continent, they call it, by a guy called Howard French. This is massive. Infrastructures, telecom, highways, railways, and of course, telecommunications mean access to data, means e-commerce, all of this. So the next continent, the continent of the present and especially of the future, is very much going to be in China's hands unless the West manage to get back in some ways, including the Europeans. To respond to your query about the New World Order, if I may, I think China is more interested in displacing the United States rather than replacing it. That means making the US more irrelevant or less relevant and making China relevant by investing, by being a geo-economic power, by enhancing the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been sort of up and down depending where you're sitting, and also creating new institutions to challenge the US-led world order. That is what's happening now. And that is what China wants to achieve. And if Donald Trump can help achieving this, they will be delighted.
I have to ask you, because we have the Africa Forward Summit happening, trying to reset France-Africa relations on the back of a very complicated scenario, should we say, since independence, and issues related to what happened in the Sahel and with the military juntas there expelling French troops and French media, including France 24, across the Sahel states. But the summit is about the whole of Africa, looking at sort of investment opportunities. China, as you say, has been there for such a long time. I've worked on, say, African football, and if you look at sort of where the stadium has been built, if there's a new stadium, it's been a Chinese project. Yes. If there's any kind of infrastructure development, China's been at the back of it, or even at the forefront of it. China's involvement in Africa has been huge, has it? Can France catch up? Because just on the example of the summit happening in Africa, do you think France can start to make inroads? I'm thinking previously the likes of Vincent Bolloré's invested in Africa. It's been complicated. There have been issues related to that. But at least that's been something that is happening. Do you think France can build positively?
I think, France is trying. France has old relations with some of the African countries, no doubt. But think about it. Rare earth, critical minerals, magnets, all these come by and large from Africa, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, among other countries. Mali, which is in trouble. Many of these countries are in trouble. And China has been the main customer. China has been acquiring massive amounts of these rare earth materials and taking them to China and taking them into chemistry factories and remaking it and becoming the prime provider of minerals around the world. Now, if the Europeans or the Americans can get to Africa and try to challenge that would be great. But it's going to be a hard sell, and it's the same in Myanmar, in other parts of the world where China has been building on this, and it's giving them an advantage, at least for a few years.
Before we go to our guests afar, let's take a moment to think about Emmanuel Macron speaking later on tonight. He's going to be talking about France and its involvement in Africa, and I think we can take a listen to the French president speaking on this very issue regarding French involvement.
As of 2017, we launched the G5 Sahel Alliance, which sought to include security, development and politics all together. We need to be tougher on this and demand more from leaders, for them to move faster on administration, development projects and emancipation projects in territories that were retaken from terrorists. Because in the end, this came across as us bringing a security guarantee. So I believe that we should have had these difficult conversations earlier on and therefore rethink our military presence earlier on.
Emmanuel Macron speaking in full, 9 o'clock Paris time, Central European time, here on this channel. And of course, you'll be able to catch it again anytime you like via our website. That's the luxury of having a website, I suppose. Let's bring in from New York, Zhongguan Zoe Liu, who is Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, to talk about rare earths, to talk about China's involvement in Africa, to talk about what happens next. Zoe, over to you.
So, Mark, I agree with our other panelists' point with regard to China's dominance in rare earth material, as well as China's involvement in Africa. But I wanted to push back a little bit with regards to what China really wants from the United States and what China wants from the world. To be honest, I do not think China wants to be the world hegemon, or for that matter, I do not think China is actively, or for that matter, China, the Communist Party of China is trying to sell the China brand. The reason is because for a long period of time, China has been very bad at PR. There is a fine line between what is propaganda. There is also what it is called public relations, and China is learning. We are still remembering the period of wolf warriors. But what I'd say what China really wants is that it wants a de facto veto against America's unilateral action power. And it also wants the freedom of action in its core area of strategic interests. And that includes its right to pursue a technological advancement, as well as Taiwan and perhaps South China Sea. And this is sort of the back logic of China spent the past 30 years trying to learn the rule book written by the United States. It pushed back, it advocated for reform, and it even built an alternative around it, right? The so-called, in terms of China-led initiatives from the New Development Bank, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as the renminbi-backed payment and settlement system. But all this basically means that China wants to have a insurance. It builds all sorts of things like this. It wants an insurance. It wants a hedge in case it needs it. Fundamentally, China spent the past 30 years learned to play the rule book, and it thought that it played so well. It even learned how to do export controls, and yet now President Trump is trying to rewrite the rule. So this is why I think for China, this is not a good thing. So in a way, President Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China, they got the version of America they wanted, which is a weaker America that is less capable, less credible to rally allies around, including France. But then at the same time, this also means that a less predictable America is also undermining the exact rule, the exact global system that China's rise has dependent on.
It sounds like, Zoe, you're saying that Donald Trump's second term has really brought the kind of chaos to the world that some people could take advantage of. Perhaps China could be best placed to do that.
I'd say China would welcome any opportunity to present itself as a stabilizer, especially relative to the United States. And for what it's worth, the special operation in Venezuela, or for that matter, the war in Iran, China considers itself not a part of it. But then at the same time, of course, China welcomes the opportunity to show it can be a responsible stakeholder. As many years ago, American policymakers have called China to do. In a way, China is not doing anything, is not changing anything, is not even changing its industrial policies, is actually double down on its manufacturer-driven growth and export-driven growth. But what has changed is America under the Trump administration.
Zoe, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Illinois to Nancy Qian, a professor of economics at Northwestern, and of course co-director of the Global Poverty Research Lab and founder of the Independent China Lab. Nancy, this meeting could be in many ways very decisive on a number of issues. Taiwan could be one of them. Do you feel there will be a resolution regarding Iran? Trump might be asking Xi Jinping to stop arming Iran. Xi Jinping has said that he would like to see peace there and the Strait of Hormuz reopened clearly for China's strategic interests. Do you think these things will happen?
So I think questions will be asked, requests will be made, and answers will be given. I don't think this meeting is going to resolve a lot of issues. I think whatever is said at this meeting can be changed any day at any time. And that's just the nature of the current US presidency, right? There's just a lack of commitment. And also, I think the Chinese, knowing that, they'll just say what it takes to get things going. And what do they actually want to get going? Like, what are they trying to achieve? Well, they want to achieve first, the sense that China is an equal partner to the United States, that this is the beginning of many conversations that will come. They want to establish that, just their position and the new geoeconomic landscape that Trump has created. And secondly, they want to create domestic political stability. And in order to do that, they do want some cooperation from the United States. And going back to Iran, there are a lot of things that the US is going to ask for, like reducing exports, Taiwan, that China will not budge on. They cannot. They just need these things for political or economic reasons for their domestic constituents. But the one thing that I can give is Iran. So China is capable of playing that role of international mediator for Iran, for the US and Iran. And I think there's really no reason why it wouldn't do that. But it's going to want to maximize this leverage before it delivers the goods.
Nancy, thank you very much indeed. As you were speaking, we had images of Donald Trump speaking before he starts off on the journey. He was saying that he doesn't think he'll need Xi Jinping's help to solve the situation in Iran, and he's looking forward to a long conversation with his Chinese counterpart. That brings this debate to a close. I'd like to thank from Evanston, Illinois, Nancy Kian, from New York City, Zhongguan Zoe Liu. Thank you for your contributions, much appreciated. Thanks to our guests here in the studio. They are Philippe Lecour, Senior Fellow for the Centre for China Analysis and Professor at ESSEC Business School, and Claudia Astarita, who is a researcher at the Institute of Asie Orientale and lecturer at Sciences Po here in Paris. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to you all for watching. Do stay with us here on France 24.